through that. So I'll be doing your intro and then we'll go. So anyways, I want to welcome you to today's Char Talk, and we have off streams own Varsha Ramesh Walsh on here today, and I'm very happy and excited to have her as quite an up and comer actually quite established, well established in the carbon market field. And we've had a great chance to get together and learn together, and I hope to get to do more. A couple of notes: we'll be kicking it off at 12:05 to allow some folks to get on, more folks to get on here. Going through, we will be recording this, and that recording will be available later. We'll get it out to you all, folks. And additionally, in the background here, we have Katie Utzhaus from MNBI. Will be working on the background in the administrative role here. And Katie is one of the headmasters behind here on developing this system. This is our first Char Talk using the Zoom platform, and we're moving on to our own materials here. We're going through that growth mode right now. MNBI is a nonprofit organization that's come together to build the biochar community in Minnesota, the Midwest, and across the nation and across the world, etc. But we're very fortunate to have all these monthly Char Talks and bring you topical experts from around the nation and around the world to bring you the latest up-to-date information in the field as it goes. During the presentation, Varsha will be given the presentation here, is that hold your questions until the end here. Feel free to drop questions into the chat, and we will answer them in the order that received. And after that, but you feel free to also raise your hand, and we will call on folks in the order that your hand is raised.
Okay.
And we'll have a really good chance after the presentation for a robust question and answer. I've had the fortunate opportunity to meet Varsha and interact with her quite a bit over this past year, and very fortunate to have her on Char Talk. She's quite the dynamic person, and talk about very topical work on how to make your biochar project financially feasible. With that, I'm going to start off here with the introduction. Pleased to see you all. We'll be getting more folks on in here as it goes along. But I'd like to introduce Varsha Ramesh Walsh, who is the CEO and co-founder of Offstream, a company dedicated to helping carbon project developers navigate compliance, streamline reporting, and maximize revenue in evolving carbon markets. She founded Offstream in 2023 after spending years as a project developer, where she experienced firsthand the inefficiencies that make the carbon verification costly and time-consuming. Carbon credit. Offstream helps carbon project developers streamline LCA and certification, freeing up their time to scale their operations. Previously, Varsha was a strategy lead at Indigo Ag, where she launched a traceable cotton business. At Indigo, she encountered the challenges that Offstream now solves, building a huge team and spending millions just to meet carbon compliance requirements. That experience highlighted the urgent need for a more efficient, scalable approach to carbon project validation and reporting, ultimately leading to Offstream's founding. Beyond Offstream, Varsha is a women in climate speaker and a Climate Vine Fellow, contributing to thought leadership in climate and sustainability. Her background spans strategy, venture capital, and product management, with past roles at Patch, Bluestein Ventures, and Deloitte Consulting. She holds an MBA from Harvard Business School and is currently based in Denver, Colorado. And we want to welcome you, Varsha. And just again, we're recording here today, but Varsha, if you want to start, share your screen, and the floor is yours.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. I didn't know we were going to read that entire bio out loud, but I'm glad everyone knows my background, and it's great to be with everyone today. So as Jim mentioned, yes, we have a presentation. Definitely, we can do verbal questions at the end, but if you have questions and you drop them in the chat as I'm going through things, I'm also happy to incorporate them into what we're talking about. I'm generally very conversational and casual. So we'll aim for about like 20 minutes or so in this presentation. Jim and I are going to have a little live exercise where we go through what he's experiencing and weighing right now with respect to revenue from carbon credits for his project in Minneapolis. And then we'll open it up to you. So thank you. Okay, so topics we'll cover. We'll start with just a basic summary of how I think about technology and operations from the lens of maximizing carbon credit revenue. So I'll acknowledge there's other ways we should be making money from biochar projects, but focus today's conversation on credits because, as Jim mentioned, that's a space that I've been in for 7 years now, and it's not, it has like the good and the bad and the ugly, but it is something that I think will continue to help biochar projects put together a package that attracts capital. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about what goes into like the documentation and audits that give folks credits and basically help you issue them, the process to do so. And then we'll talk about market positioning from the lens of registries, which I can spend some time defining just depending on the audience. I know we probably have a mix, talking about third-party solutions. And in doing so, we'll look at the Minneapolis project and some registries for that. So this is meant to be fun and interactive. So just let's do it. Okay, so I mentioned there are many different revenue sources for an industrial biochar project. This is not comprehensive, but for most of the folks that we work with at Offstream, these are the 4 kind of types of revenue streams they're considering. So selling their biochar, if they can, selling their energy, or maybe using it as part of an agreement for feedstock or something else, selling co-products, which are typically some sort of liquid potentially coming out of biochar production, and then selling carbon credits. Today, I just want to talk about number 4, but I just didn't want to ignore the other ones. And what I want to spend a little bit of time on is just like the system. So when we often work with folks, they come to us and they have a plan, maybe a plan, or have some of these things thought about. So they come to us and they say, I think I have 3 gasification or pyrolysis technologies in mind. Can I get credits? And I typically try to understand how much of these like gray boxes around the system they've thought about. But basically, when you think about maximizing revenue, the most important thing is to recognize that, like, to issue a carbon credit and to basically unlock that 4th revenue stream, project developers need a really good handle on their entire system. So of course that includes the core production of biochar, whether it's like a rotary kiln like Jim and team are using, but also a lot of other data. When we work with folks, so what we do is we help them get certified and stay certified. So without going too much into Offstream, when I think about getting certified, a lot of times I hear from folks, they're surprised about the level of data that they need to know about like team members and what they're doing on site, and or like the safety mechanisms and employee handbook that they have. But if you take a step back, essentially, like for carbon credit revenue to be smooth for biochar project developers, they basically need to prove to agencies and registries that they are tracking everything that they would need to do to run a really best-in-class operation that produces high-quality biochar and co-products and energy, but that also that they're doing that and tracking more, especially around the edges and the system boundaries of the project. So everything coming in from offsite, everything leaving, which is usually biomass in, and also end use, like where the biochar goes. So I just wanted to say that when you, maybe my big call to action here is, if you're designing a project and you know you want carbon credits to be part of the solution, to think about all these buckets and just have a strategy from the beginning, so that it's not an afterthought, so that when you turn your switch on and you start operating in steady state, you don't lose out on that big 4th revenue stream. Okay, that's pretty much it on technology. We can obviously go back into it more if anyone has specific questions, or I don't think I see anything in the chat. So when we meet folks, I think these slides are out of order. So when we meet folks on, they often say, we want to get certified carbon credits. And I think level 1 is just meeting the requirements of carbon credit methodologies. So methodologies I like to think of them as like the recipes that are published by these third-party registries. So they're published today by Pure Earth, by Isometric, by Climate Action Reserve, by Rainbow. There's a Vera, and I list them, and we can talk about them and the trade-offs in a second. But they today basically do two things. They write these standards, and then they enforce them, and they track like how many credits have been generated and where they go. And so the bare minimum, if you want to get credits, is to meet their requirements, because to get credits, you have to pass this like recipe checklist essentially. I think next level, if you really want to maximize revenue, so I think about today's topic, is basically by like taking that data and having it not just be a check the box exercise, but also like proving that you have complete visibility over it and sharing it in a transparent and visual way with carbon credit buyers, with potential investors, with auditors, and using that as a way to basically sell at a premium. So the cleaner your books essentially, and the more easy they are to understand for someone who doesn't understand the intricacies of an industrial biochar project, the more compelling and easy it is to pass through various like diligence processes to sell your credits, which is a big part of, I think, how things unfortunately still work today. It's not this like perfectly liquid commodity market. The biochar transactions that we see are smoother if credits have already passed certification, but in many cases, like the folks we work with are trying to sign multi-year offtake agreements before they've actually generated the credits. So yes, they are meeting level 1, but they're having to kind of go above and beyond because they haven't been audited yet. So I just want to acknowledge there's 2 levels, and we're practical about this. I think my philosophy here is start with level 1, like get your first site up and running, but then recognize that there is like there is another level if you want, and it's just basically a return on investment decision that we see operators make. Is it worth it to invest more in something that's going to help me be positioned in the top 10% of this market? For some, yes. If you have all 4 revenue streams and credits are not 70% plus of how you make money, then maybe it's actually not necessary, and level 1 is actually enough. And so I like to be pretty pragmatic about it. But taking a step back, so with that goal in mind, like maybe it's clear to you where you fit in, but we'll talk about both levels. But if you think about just the phases involved, I want to spend a little bit of time on this. So the first thing that we see is really critical for project developers and operators to do is to confirm eligibility of their project within a specific standard. And we'll do this actually, I'll just do it right now for the sake of smoothness, but basically I think y'all can see this, but the way we do this at Offstream, and we'll go through this with Jim in a second, is understand what's your project name, where is it, who are your partners, what feedstock are you using? So this is a huge one for eligibility. Whenever we meet folks and they want to know, can I generate carbon credits? We ask them, what's your feedstock, and can you identify it possibly from this specific list? Because there are lots of nuances and lots of edge cases, unfortunately, in gray area here, because the underlying thing that registries are worried about is that if we're not using specific biomass feedstock, it's just leading to like cutting down more trees or something that's net not sustainable or net bad for carbon emissions. And that would just be counterproductive to the industry overall. So this is something that I think will continue to evolve as we have this tension between practical, like what is waste biomass, and academic. Like there's just I think an industry discussion that's going to change over the next few years and continue to change. But regardless, very important to know your biomass options and identify and confirm that all of them are eligible if you want to do credits. Pick a technology. So in this case, we have here Jim's answers, but in general, there are nuances with each piece of technology. So before making that investment, ideally confirming that it's eligible is super valuable. And finally, end use. So like, where is this biochar going to go? It needs to be permanently stored. So there are lots of ways to interpret that, but this is the second part, I think, of this world that continues to evolve, but you can think of permanent storage as somewhere where it can't be burned and it won't be re-released into the atmosphere. So I think of biochar as shelf stable, but obviously it degrades. Soil is a very common permanent storage location today with kind of an implied degradation because it's the carbons kind of sit and evolve in soil for a long time. Building materials are another option, but something like burning it obviously is not permanent storage, but that's also super valid use of biocarbon. So end use, and then just to wrap it up, any lab testing results. So to really understand, is my biochar eligible? There are some thresholds. So for example, I think we list them here, but you need to know the total carbon content, hydrogen to carbon organic ratio, heavy metals, PAHs, any other aromatics, and there are hard cutoffs. So if your biochar is over 0.7, for example, hydrogen to carbon organic ratio, you're just not going to be eligible for credits. It's probably not even going to be considered proper char, but that's not what we're talking about here today. So I suggest, and this will be something we'll go through in more detail, like whenever we meet folks, this is worth it before you spend any money really like building too much. Or if you have options, then you could start and then, iterate as you go. But it's not easy to, like, this is not something that's flexible or negotiable, these eligibility criteria, or especially around feedstock and end use. And so knowing the end in mind is really helpful to start with. But often what we see is that folks like have a kind of brainstormed idea of what they're trying to do. They confirm eligibility. Then they spend anywhere from months to years finalizing site design. And this timeline varies a lot based on the size of the project, budget, team. Is it their top priority, or is it something small they're embedding? And that's fine. But after that happens, essentially between like finalizing site design and commissioning the site, there's a lot of one-time data that these registries want to know. This is like proof of your employee handbooks or certificates on your biomass or let's see, another example is your contracts with your end use supplier. So a lot of this information, kind of think about it as one time for every facility. And that work, I often recommend that folks do alongside commissioning, or, in the months leading up to like the close commissioning of their site. And then they focus on commissioning. And then at that point, they need to collect a couple of months of live ongoing data. So that's basically data on all the operations, all the emissions that you're using, the emissions that you're producing from transport, how much biochar is being produced, where it's going. I can go through all those requirements in a second, but that has to happen. And only then does an auditor come, do an on-site audit, and then you get certified. And so this whole process, obviously the timeline can vary quite a bit based on how long it takes to move from idea to construction. But, the fastest we've seen it, if a project's funded already, it's like 6 months. If a project is not already funded, it can obviously take multiple years, but step one can happen really with very limited funding, and I recommend it to everyone. So these are the phases, and there are just like distinct kind of pieces of documentation that are needed at each of these phases. So in the beginning, it's highly valuable to get what we call a preliminary life cycle assessment. And what that tells you is basically how many credits you estimate you'll get for every ton of biochar that's produced. So it's a multiplier, and often folks will come to us and they'll say, yeah, I'm using this number like 2.0 or 2.2 or 2.5 in my model. What do you think? And I say, it's really hard for me to tell you an honest answer without seeing a preliminary LCA, which requires that lab test result often to get a much tighter number. So the value of doing this upfront is that if you can test your specific biomass through the multiple different technologies you're considering, get ideally an indicative lab test result, it will really inform that multiplier. So instead of it being like a random estimate, it can be a much more narrow ranged model input. And it matters a lot because if you think about it, you're multiplying your tons of biochar produced by up to 3. So well, it's even 2.5. But then if you multiply that by the price per credit, it's in the hundreds of thousands of dollars if you're off by a little bit. So that's a big document to focus on first. I think everyone should start there. And the second document is a pre-assessment. And so increasingly, the registries that I'll spend a little bit more time on offer this actually. So you could obviously pay a consultant to do an independent study, but also you could actually pay or go through the process by registering with the specific registry for them to review your project at the idea stage. And the benefit of that is you get on their radar, you're in their system, and it's kind of like getting an answer from the IRS. You're getting actually feedback from the folks that are going to review your project in the future. And we work with a lot of our customers on this, and they find tremendous value in it because they can announce it. It's like a whole thing that they get benefit from. So that's phase 1. And then once the site design is finalized, there are lots of kind of one-time reports that I mentioned, but a lot of this is like, what's your plan? What are your other benefits? Have you engaged with stakeholders in your community for years now and tracked some of that? And so what helps about doing the pre-assessment is that we then can educate folks on like the checklist of things they'll need to do. But regardless, even if they start this after the site is designed, they have enough time typically to continue to do the work that they need to do, commission the site, track the actual data, and then put everything together to submit. And so after it's submitted, there's realistically monthly reporting that helps folks with cash flow, but then a lot of it can also be done on a quarterly basis, or some of it's annual. So there's kind of a mix of monthly, quarterly, and annual reporting to keep your credits. After that first on-site audit, also, as long as you pass and your books continue to look clean, most of those subsequent audits are virtual, so they can be faster, but it is still a blocker. And depending on how many credits you generate, that can be a huge delay. So I will just name that's a known issue in the space right now. But these are the phases of work. And here are some major registries, and I can spend a little bit of time talking about each of them, but just a few sentences on each. All 5 of these registries here have biochar methodologies that have eligibility for industrial biochar. So Isometric, Rainbow, and Puro Earth are all focused exclusively on removals, and they're newer registries. They've been around like 5-6 years maximum. And then Climate Action Reserve and Vera have been around longer. They're both nonprofits, whereas the top 3 are for-profits. So it is a mix. All 5 of them still today write their own standards and use those, but the standards are similar in many cases. They follow similar underlying like quantification models. And the way I think about that is like there's a big math equation that you fill out to calculate how many credits you get. And that math equation is not like terribly different across them, but there are some slight variations. So maybe one sentence on each, and then Jim, maybe I'll ask you to come on, and I don't see you right now. We can go through your project and talk about the registries live, but Isometric is based in the UK. They have I think a really good fit for folks who are smaller volumes, but maybe pushing for like really extreme, like level 2 data reporting. They reward basically projects who want to do continuous emissions monitoring systems. And I'll go into the unit economics in a second, but they don't charge much to suppliers up front. They kind of charge more. They charge probably the highest in the market to buyers down the road. So that's Isometric. Rainbow used to be called Reverse. They're based in France. Their team is really fast, and they started actually in a similar place we did, but have evolved differently. So they started by helping project developers with life cycle assessments because it was a huge blocker. Right now, we're particularly excited about Rainbow because they have a methodology that captures some methane avoidance and carbon removal for biochar production. So if anyone here is working with a feedstock like manure or another feedstock that's currently emitting methane and is well known, there's an opportunity to generate a small number of carbon avoidance credits alongside your removals. And they're the only methodology today that we know of that does this. So if that's wrong, let me know, but that's the only one that I've seen. And so that's a particular notable fact on Rainbow. Pure Earth is based in Finland. I think they were the first removals only registry. They recently published a big update and approved that update to their methodology. It's rather similar to isometric now, so they're both quite rigorous, and they work almost exclusively with biochar. So I think they're really good at evaluating projects, and their fee structure scales with volume. So it's a little pricey in the beginning, and then it gets much cheaper over time. And then Climate Action Reserves based in California, they published a biochar methodology maybe 2 years ago now, or 1.5 years ago. It is really, really well suited to North American producers. It's the most flexible on feedstocks and the most flexible on end uses. And so when we work with folks in the US, we often find them gravitating towards this methodology because its standards just match the realities of operations here. And I can go into that in a little bit more detail. And then Vera is, their methodology covers both industrial, so these continuous flow systems, as well as what's sometimes called artisanal, or like or batch process, or even a Kentucky kiln. And so because of that, we see fewer industrial projects choose them, just because the stamp isn't as it isn't as much of like a clear standard, but they are actually digitizing a lot, and a lot of buyers still really just want these bottom two registries because they've been around a lot longer and they're well-known brands. So those are 5. Jim, I'm sorry, I might have prematurely told you to get off mute because there's one more slide I have here, but you're welcome to, I love your face, so you can stay on. But basically, Jim had said he wanted to talk about pricing. I put, this is a slide that I've shared in some other workshops I thought might be helpful, but it's basically looking at all the different steps of getting certified and what's covered versus not across these 3. And it's just that I haven't had a chance to redo this for Char and Rainbow. So that's the reason they're not included, but I will. And if you guys want, I'm happy to share it with everyone. But if you think about the steps that I mentioned, right, there's like always a life cycle assessment. Some registries have an explicit, like you need to submit your a third-party LCA, others don't. So if they do, there's a budget line item that's basically outside the scope of what you pay that registry. And then they have registry fees. So how much does it cost to open an account? How much do you pay every year? And then in some cases, and so Climate Action Reserve fits in this category too, you pay for your audit, and others you don't. So this has kind of gone out of fashion a bit, because if you're getting audited and that audit is going to inform how many credits you get, some have said it's a conflict of interest to pay yourself for your audit. And so the newer registries like Puro, Isometric basically embed that pricing into their fee structure, but then they hire the auditor, they run a fair process to do so, and they send the auditor to your site. The downside of that is that you have less control over scheduling, you have less control over getting it done, and that can be frustrating for some as well. So in Vera's kind of budget item here that gets put in, same thing with verification. So that's basically the ongoing work to review things that can be virtual. And today, most of the time, validation and verification happen together. Validation is checking the box, like, is your project design good? Verification is, did you do everything you said you were going to do in your project design? And then finally, each of them make money basically on a per ton basis. And so this is an example for a big project, right? So it's basically as at low scale, as I mentioned, like Isometric's really compelling because you don't have to pay anything as a project developer to be on their platform. But at scale, they charge buyers quite a bit. And so that ends up getting priced in, like, yes, they charge buyers, but I think transparently how markets work, like these fees basically just get priced into the transaction. So your take home as a developer is going to look pretty consistent, regardless, I think, of fees, and I'll stand by that. And then, as you can see at scale, Vera or Climate Action Reserve has pretty similar pricing here, are much cheaper, but then you have to do the work of finding your auditor, finding your kind of LCA provider. And so it can be mixed, but I hope that this is helpful. And if anyone has specific questions, I can follow up with you afterwards. Okay, but now we're ready for Jim, and then we can wrap up quickly, but thank you. Okay, so Jimmy, you answered questions in our spreadsheet just to make things easier here, but I wanted to basically talk about the 3 factors that we really look at when we're advising on registries with our customers. So it's what's your feedstock, what's your technology, and what's your end use. And I can basically tell you live today, like across the 5 registries, which ones you'd be eligible for and maybe which ones to focus in on. Does that sound okay?
Yep. And starting on the first one, we have 2 agreements in place right now for feedstock, and we are working on a 3rd agreement as we speak.
Okay.
All consistent, all waste wood coming from either diseased trees, maintenance, etc. So no healthy trees were harmed as part of our process.
Okay.
And it comes to us basically through it had been through a tub grind or a preliminary grind. So it's already ground before it gets to us.
Okay.
Then it's wood chips, and then we take it down to a 20 millimeter size and dry it to 15% moisture.
Okay. Do you know if the wood comes with any like FSC certification or is part of a government managed sustainability scheme?
I will double check on that with Hennepin County. That could very well be part of it.
Yeah.
The Excel and Park Board, I should say, as well. Excel Energy, the wood waste comes from line maintenance and part of hazard reduction.
Nice.
But Hennepin County and the Minneapolis Park Board are the other 2, and that's coming from managing public forests. Okay.
Yeah. This question is an important one for everyone listening. I think so. Some registries, specifically Puro and Icemetric, are a lot, they're pickier about this like government stamp of approval. And so if you have FSC certified wood, you're totally in the clear. And then if you don't, there's just some other questions we typically would ask you around the status quo, but usually if it's post-processed and that processing was already happening, you're just taking sawdust or wood chips from an existing process, you're good. But Climate Action Reserve is the most flexible on this. So they have actually like measurement requirements, like the diameter of the wood that you receive if it is big. So I'd say just for the sake of time, across those 5 registries, you could be good with all 5. You're probably definitely good with Climate Action Reserve. And if you have any sort of certificates, then you'd be good with the rest. So yeah.
All right. Yep. I can double check with the county and the park board on that.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay. The next one's easier. So you're using a Beston BST6 rotary kiln. So each registry handles this differently, but let me go through them. So again, on the strictest ends, so Puro actually makes this, I'll say Icemetric will review each kiln individually today. They don't yet, to our knowledge, have like a short list of technologies you can use. Puro does, and Beston has been working really hard with them to be on that list. The unit that's on that list today, though, is the BST50, which is different from yours, but usually because they're familiar with the technology, it speeds up that process. And usually in the US, if you pass safety and permitting requirements here, it's typically good enough. Some of the concerns when importing technology are around safety. So,
and our unit it's smaller than the other one. So the other ones are much larger scale, but it's just scaled down. Is same version,
right? Yeah,
and then we actually improved the steel from the off the shelf to handle the higher temperatures. So we have a stainless steel components, and to replace the high wear items. and are updating the automation and shutdown features, etc., to maintain the temperature around 600 degrees.
Perfect. So you're probably good with any registry. I'll just flag, I think, again, with the 5. So isometric and Puro are particular about the type. Like they'll actually evaluate the reactor specs. So if you're looking at vendors, get those specs from folks. It's really helpful. And then Climate Action Reserve does not actually explicitly do so today, but they care deeply about the quality of the char coming out. So you still need to have tested it. And Vera is in the middle. They want the specs, but they're flexible, as I mentioned, especially across industrial and non-industrial. And Rainbow too wants the specs. So in general, get reactor specs, but know that there are some options. And then Isaac, Israel, I saw your question and I will quickly address it. So Israel asked, is slash from FSC SFI certified timber harvest okay? It depends. It's probably an unfulfilling answer, but yes, usually if the wood originated with a certificate and it's post-processed wood, which originally had their certificate, if you can just prove chain of custody, that's fine. And there's some other like exceptions that can be made if it's a post-disaster recovery site or something like that. So I will flag that. And then your second question is there a burden of proof from the feedstock supplier that it was slash? Yes. And that burden of proof is a bit of a art and a science. So would waste from deconstructing qualify with FSC? I'm going to say that I'm not going to give perfect answers on biomass. This is the thing that when we onboard folks, we spend a lot of time on. But Shane, I think if it originated, like I'm not an FSC expert. So if it has a certificate, it's straight down the fairway. And if it doesn't, there's some other questions we can talk about.
I can just comment on that one real quick as well.
Yeah.
And just if I'm looking at interpretation, as part of one of our conditions of operating is that we do not take a construction debris or deconstructing from wood, because there was a question on the source plus the other materials that may be in there. And as part of our agreement with Pollution Control Agency in Minnesota, ours is only coming from trees, from storm damage, maintenance, disease, etc. And there's no construction related wood going into our system.
Yeah, that was a great answer, Jim. Kevin asked if there's a feedstock that does not qualify for credits. I'm going to come to it in 1 second because I'm almost done with Jim and then we can take him off the hot seat. But so this is the third question, and then the last is end use. And so we talked about this. You have 2 end uses here, so I just want to speak about it for a second. So soil health, it's helpful to know a specific plan, and it's okay if you don't have one. So some options. Do you have one?
Oh yeah, no, I could talk more about it. I was just trying to be brief in the answer to get you a response here yesterday.
Oh, perfect.
But our applications we're looking at is one of the first ones is of course urban agriculture. We're doing a lot of work with in urban food systems and urban agriculture, so it would be soil health for that. Okay. The other one is our urban forests and tree plantings with bare root stock, but also into road construction in boulevard and median construction to in the sides of the road to help with planting, plant growth, drought resilience, etc., and also to help infiltration of stormwater. And we're looking at side slopes and conveyances as well for transportation projects, not only to infiltrate and help the soil or the plants grow, but also to help remove contaminants from first flush off of roadways to protect waterways. And then the other thing is in stormwater, that are 2 really big components, is that they say in with a rain garden, helping filter the water that comes through the rain gardens before it gets discharged in order to remove contaminants. Nice. We are looking at other aspects of it, particularly to control nitrates that are getting into our waterways, and also E. coli from mainly waterfowl. And so we're looking at that in our water systems to help address our requirements under MS4 permit.
Nice.
And as well as on roadsides for infiltrating water, stormwater, to reduce that and keep that available for plant growth to transpire it back out. We are in the process of working with the University of Minnesota. And I saw some folks out here and looking at this as exploring as a way to help decarbonize concrete construction, mortars, bricks, construction, etc. So into construction materials as well. And we're working with both the University of Minnesota and Natural Resource Research Institute in Duluth to deliver on that. And we have been working with a couple agencies, including Natural Resource Research Institute and Wood Products up in Duluth, to look at our assessing our material that it comes out, to ensure that, you know, as far as ash content, carbon content, H to C ratio, etc., and to verify that, to really to take a look to make sure we're achieving the operating temperatures that we're hoping to achieve. To get those, we're looking at an H to C ratio below 0.4.
Amazing. Thank you. So a few notes. I think both of these are eligible. Soil health is straightforward if you own and like it's really easy if you own the process of putting it in the soil yourself, or if you have control over that. And it gets harder if you're selling to a compost company or many compost companies, or selling directly bagged biochar to consumers. Like that's actually not allowed in most registries today. But obviously it's easier said than done. The more like direct oversight a project developer has over end use, the fewer questions they'll get about it, because every credit buyer is concerned about the backlash if they bought a credit and it turns out that it was never permanently stored. So that's very relevant to soil health. Stormwater fits into this like category that we're calling it's a cascading use. So you could use it for filtration, but then ideally then put it somewhere else, like a landfill or another storage location that's considered permanent. And so that's allowed, but needs to be still then moved somewhere else. It can't just be a filter that goes into a consumer good, for example. You can't like sell
in our intent for particularly for the contaminants we're looking at, and we will, you know, we're going to be looking at other things that might be picked out, you know, with particular look at heavy metals, etc. But a lot of the contaminants, the concern that we're looking at, will actually benefit the soil if we then use it in soil applications.
Okay, perfect.
We're trying to address a lot of the nutrients, and E. coli will actually be beneficial in soil health.
Okay, I actually didn't know that, so I'm glad to hear that. If we have any agronomists on, that's really exciting. So thank you. Okay, perfect. So yeah, basically this is obviously not perfect. Like this is not totally comprehensive, but helpful maybe for folks. Your biggest takeaway is like the more you know, or the more you can understand some of these nuances, the easier it'll be down the road. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And Jim, did you have anything else you wanted to say on that before we move on?
We are looking at with a couple of composting operations, and one would be into our own city compost, which is a contract or another separate entity does, but we can add that back in for use within the city enterprise on city projects with city compost. The other one being a mixing with another composter, but that would be for specific projects. That would be as part, you know, going through a contractor would be buying a product, and we would provide that to help meet the specifications of the project. But we be going through the composter in order to do the mixing and the delivery.
Okay, great. I feel like you're probably in a better position than many because you work for the city, so it's easier to influence folks to follow your process. But I think in general, thinking about, okay, am I in it? Like buyers really look at it this way. They look at, okay, is this project in an area where contracts are enforced or not? You know, it's like basic things that sometimes I take for granted, but if you sign an affidavit, is it taken seriously? And around the world, the answer to that is yes and no in some places. And so obviously, depending on where you are, you can apply some judgment around like the level of there's different ways to prove you know what's happening. So anyway, great. Kevin, do you have a different question, or do you want to ask it a different way? Is there a specific feedstock you're looking at? Oh, you're muted right now. Wait, we can't hear you, Kevin. Can you hear us?
Apologies for that.
No worries. We didn't hear any of your questions, so feel free to say it again.
As you know, I'm a small scale mobile biochar kiln manufacturer, and I come across people that are asking me about feedstocks from all levels, and that's an important question that I guess I wanted to start with. And then is there like biochar as a service is something that they're looking at as well, where literally people buy a machine and they go to the site to do all the work, and that's predominantly what they're going to use with my kiln. Does that all fit into a nice big package with a big bow on it to get all that?
That's the trick question, isn't it? Okay, more so, like, so today, yes, it's like easier to do biochar as a service for mobile kilns than it was a year ago. So Pure Earth's new standard that was just approved, so it's their 2025 standard, allows mobile kilns, and you kind of set a project radius. Climate Action Reserve also allows this. And so for the, where before it was like a hard no, good luck, now there's some options. So it's better than it used to be, for sure. One of the challenges with the model is if feedstock changes frequently, which it does, is you need to get an LCA, a life cycle assessment every time. And then there needs to be a lot of rigor around lab testing. But there are, like, it is possible. Is that a satisfying answer, or is there a specific question you wanted to talk about?
I guess basically the main question was, is basically every feedstock qualify?
Oh, no. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's I can't give you like a full list. I actually don't know that I have it in my head, but there are lists of what does qualify. So I can share them if you want to look at the actual list. I have 2 pulled up right now, but I'll just show you really quickly for the sake. So this is the Climate Action Reserve one, and how they're structured is that they basically say the category, what's eligible, and what needs to be true. This is also the one that that the Carbon Standards International group posts. So it's like, if you're really into finding your own solutions, there's a handful of these lists that you can look at. If not, that's something we do too at Offstream, and make it a little bit easier. It's like a checklist. But there are certain feedstocks that I can tell you today are not eligible for carbon credits, and it's if they're not biogenic in nature. So tires, tire waste, railroad ties, we're working on it, but because of the chemicals, it's an issue.
Right.
What else comes up a lot? Mixed municipal solid waste, where you can't separate the biomass from the non-biomass. But that is changing, that municipal solid waste one. So I think it'll continue to evolve, but those are a few that come up frequently, and then it's a challenge. But like, some treated waste wood is allowed. So it's a little bit, unfortunately, but I think most of the mobile sites are often from like land clearing activities. And so what's tricky about those that I see is, if let's say like a data center, this is something I heard recently, like data center companies are basically clearing land to build these big data centers, and they need someone to take all the wood. It's sometimes a hard sell for certain registries, depending on like when that land clearing was happening, or if it was construction related, as Jim said. And so I would just say it as the biochar person who's taking the risk on the kiln, there's certain things you can request of your customers, I suppose, or you can do a rev share to incent them to like follow a forest management plan, or to source and scope in a specific area. Yeah.
So basically everything is situational and you got to
I
evaluate
know,
it.
unfortunately.
Stop and go.
It's
Okay.
just feedstock that's the word that's like the most situational, honestly. Everything else I think is a little bit more clear cut, but there are ones that are straight down the fairway. So I'll share those lists after this and you can take a look at them. It's just everything that's not there is on a case by case basis. So yeah.
Got it. Thank you so much.
Of course. Dwayne, I saw your hand is raised and then we have 2 questions in the chat I see. Do you want to ask your question, Dwayne?
Well, it's just a statement of knowledge.
Oh, great.
The question on the concept of what is permanent. And I just want to make sure that you're aware that permanent in a roadside it is permanent, but the road may be redone in, let's say, 8 to 25 years. So what's incorporated into the soil is still there, but the road might change because nothing stays there for 1,000 years. We're lucky to get 7 years out of a road or even a rain garden. So the soil it's always in the soil. That doesn't disappear. But like I said, I just want to make sure you know that permanent probably has different meaning to different people.
Yes, I do know that. And also the registries do define it.
Make sure that they define that because in terms of those eventually getting credit, we still have to rebuild the road for public safety reasons or all things we build wear out. A farm field, on the other hand, may also change from a farm field to a housing development. And it's going like crazy all around, the 7-county, 12-county metro area. So again, I couldn't even tell you what permanent is anymore when a farm turns into a residential, these new high performance, I guess, artificial intelligence server centers and other, land use components. Now, if it was used combined with, let's say, solar farms, as a loose term, that likely would be permanent. Like the farm might still have benefits of growing sheep, for example, but it's unlikely to go from a solar farm to a residential. So it's kind of, it's going to be strange to argue what is permanent. So I just want to make sure that you're aware of it. So when I use it on a roadside, it's probably permanent, but it may get shifted around a bunch of times.
Yeah, I'm aware. I think that it is actually like a topic in the industry, and biochar compared to some other types of credits have permanence questions, but I'm not the one adjudicating. I'm not defining the word permanent. We're sort of just interpreting how it's described, but biochar is often described as 100-year permanent or 200-year permanence, which has more to do with the certainty that it stayed in whatever it was mixed in. And so I would just more think about it, is it stored somewhere where it can't be burned? And that's more of the filter for, does it count for a removal credit? So thank you, Dwayne. Varun, you have a question about biochar. It's pretty specific. So it sounds like you already have a biochar made from eligible feedstock, FSC certified sawdust, and it has a really low H2C org ratio. Great. Its carbon content is also low. It is eligible. So, there isn't like a specific carbon content cutoff. But if you're using it for phosphorus capture and ag field runoffs, you would also need to then put it somewhere else, maybe back in that same field or an adjacent field. And at 22%, your credit ratio, that magic number I told you about, is going to be low because the 2 most important, I think about it as like a math equation, but the 2 most important inputs into that math equation are your H2C org and your carbon content percentage. And so I'm surprised that it's low, but it might be because of the temperature it's being processed at. And so if you can, you could potentially tweak that process or see what you can do to upgrade the carbon content. So it is, though, on a yes/no basis, like most likely eligible. So thank you. And then we have a question from Amzi. Great presentation. Thank you. What is the agreement and documentation that has to exist between the biochar producer and user? For example, if a forestry producer partners with a mining company to bury the char underground and they all want a piece. Yeah. So what does the agreement need to look like? There needs to be guarantees of a couple of things. You need to guarantee that that you, the biochar producer and seller, retain 100% ownership of the carbon removal claim. Even if you're going to then share revenue with them in the future, there's only one person who can claim the credit. So you need to have language that says basically like, we own the carbon removal claim associated with the biochar we're producing. The second thing that needs to exist in the documentation is an affidavit, basically with some teeth if possible, that indicates that they will bury the biochar and that there's a penalty if they don't. Those are both, I guess, like agreement related. The third is typically photo proof. So this is the best that we work with today. Basically, some of our producers work with their distributors who maybe will deliver their char somewhere, and that distributor takes a photo when it's delivered. And then if they can, that customer sends a photo through a third-party service, potentially like MRV service, like Offstream, to can collect that and attach it to the delivery. This is, you could obviously use like remote monitoring or some other like continuous CCTV to monitor it, but in terms of documentation, it's really helpful for that level 2 reporting if you have a visual as well as the affidavit, but it's not mission critical for every registry. Israel has a question here on additionality. So many hot button topics. So additionality includes, there's many types of additionality. The concept of additionality is this question of, okay, if the credit didn't exist, would this project exist? And my take on additionality is maybe not the popular one. I think we need that concept, but financial additionality, which is like, would this project exist without the revenue from carbon credits, is not my favorite concept. I think what it does is it yields projects that are more likely to go out of business. And it's unfortunately pretty gameable. You know, it's like you're submitting a future looking financial model, and I'm not an accountant, but it's pretty, you know, you can kind of make your model say whatever you want it to say if you're projecting into the future. And so it is still part of standards. So of course we coach our customers on how to make sure that they fit into it, but there's lots of nuances. So for example, project could be profitable without carbon credits, but not fundable. So if it's not fundable, it's still financially additional, meaning, you know, if you don't have the returns you need to like get the $2 to $5 million in CapEx to buy a big industrial unit, the credits are still meaningful for that. And there is generally this kind of comparison of what your revenue, what your financials look like with or without the biochar carbon credits. And that's how you prove that out. And then other types of additionality are regulatory. So if your government required biochar production, which I don't think anyone does, you would not be eligible for credits. If it were a very common practice, so if all your neighbors were producing biochar, it was like the status quo, that would also not be eligible. But those are other types of additionality checks that are separate from finance or financial that can be used. Did I answer your question, Israel? Okay, great. I think we have 3 minutes left. So maybe one more question, or we can wrap early because it's a Friday. So up to y'all.
Yeah, don't tempt us.
For a question or for wrapping early?
No. And one of the things that's come up for us, just in within MNBI, is taking a look at a lot of the smaller operations that we're looking at, say Contiki or Oregon Kiln, the artisanal.
Mm-hmm.
What would be the biggest challenge you'd see to going credits for an artisanal operation?
Yeah. 2 challenges. So I'm going to answer it. The first is that the size and scale of the like there's some fixed cost associated with all this carbon certification work. You need to typically work with some vendor, at least to do an LCA, if not all of the whole process for you. And then you need to pay the registry. And so if you're producing a couple 100 tons of biochar per year, the math doesn't always pencil out if you only have one. If you have many and you're going to kind of cluster them, it's a totally different equation. But it is a lot of work if that's like just one thing that you're doing. The second challenge is market perception specifically of methane emissions. So I'm not here to be the judge on this, but I think there have been questions around like monitoring the actual emissions from a Kentucky kiln, which I will differentiate from like an air curtain burner, which I think is more of a batch process, but has more measurement happening. But if there's like zero measurement of any of the emissions coming from a kiln, it's hard for some people to understand like that the emission, like what the emission profile is. And so it just optically gets a discount relative to the industrial biochar carbon removal credits. And so that is not going to be forever. I actually think some of the work that Article 6, which is the UN framework for global work, like they actually are including artisanal biochar in that and not industrial biochar, because it has a lot of there's just a lot of people doing it globally. So it's not a non-starter, but I think those are some honest headwinds that producers are up against. And the solution to it, I think, is almost like upgrading a little bit to something like an air burner or even a Tiger Cat, like something that's semi-open but still has some control system. So
no, that's a really good point. That is a very good point. Jackie, our own Jackie Smith, is an alumni of Char Talk, has an additional question there about additionality.
If carbon credits become commonplace, then the industry ceases to exist. Great question. Not quite. I think that if biochar production were as common as, I don't know, like traditional agriculture use of NPK, potentially it could be a challenge. But I expect that before, like, additionality and the concepts around additionality will change more quickly than biochar becoming like the #1 ag input is my take on that. So I'm not worried about it, but maybe we'll be wrong. And then I think that we'll see how it plays out. But it's basically like if what you're doing, like if what you're doing was going to happen by policy, by common practice, by like every incentive in the world was going to happen before, like solar, for example, doesn't qualify for carbon credits in the US because it's the cheapest form of electricity to set up today. And so if that, you know, like basically if that were the case for biochar, if it was the cheapest way to produce compost like inputs or peat replacement and everyone were doing it, I do think that would be amazing for the industry and maybe they wouldn't need carbon credits. So that's my take. And we can definitely talk about it more, Jackie. I'd love to hear your thoughts, but yeah.
This has been fantastic. I know we're at the top of the hour. Varsha, it never ceases to amaze me what that brain is thinking about. Always
this is what my brain's thinking about all day. So thank you for having me.
I will be calling on Katie to pop on real quick, but I want to remind folks that the U.S. Biochar Initiative's North American Biochar Conference will be held in Minneapolis this September 15th through the 18th, and on the 18th we have the field trips. Come on up as well. If you haven't had the chance to register, please Google North American Biochar Conference 2025, and we hope to see you in Minneapolis at the convention center. Also, Katie, any parting shots on the MNBI website or as an organization, etc.?
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Varsha. That was amazing. There's going to be some great updates to our website in the next week or so where you'll be allowed to view past Char Talks. You'll be able to sign up if you'd like to be a member and join our regular meetings. Every third Friday are our Char Talks, but otherwise we meet every Friday morning Central Time at 8:15 to 9:15. So we'd love to have you. So we're getting all of that finalized. We'll send out some information for any of you that are interested. So thank you so much.
And we appreciate everything as we grow in our organization and mature here. We are now doing it on our own network here with Zoom. I apologize for any growing pains associated with getting on here today or getting through here, but we're taking that feedback and making it better. But I want to really appreciate Katie, what she's been doing in the background to make the magic happen here today. So we all owe her thanks of gratitude. But Varsha, this is amazing. I really appreciate this information. This is, you hit it out of the park.
Oh,
so do you have any other parting comments for the group before we break for the weekend?
Sure, yeah. If you enjoyed this, if any of these questions are pertinent to projects you're working on, you can send me a note. My email is varsha@useoffstream.com, and we do a lot around like education. So even if you're early and you just want to learn, our whole mission is to reduce the friction of credits so that folks can just get them and focus on what matters. So we care a lot about that, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Varsha. And with that, thank you all for coming here and such great questions. We hope you learned a lot, and I hope to see you next month. We're working on the topic right now, and just we'll get the announcements out on that shortly. But thank you, Varsha, and have a wonderful weekend, folks.
Bye.
You too.
Bye.
Thank you.